All right, hello and welcome to the Winneshiek Energy District's June Energy Lunch Solar Financing for Nonprofits. My name is Kristen Egan. I'm the Executive Director here at the Winneshiek Energy District, and I will be your host today. Today's program is made possible in partnership with the Allamakee County Energy District, so a special welcome to anyone joining from Allamakee County today. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping items. Please stay on mute during the presentation unless you have a question. Our presenter, Mike, does welcome conversational presentation style. So if you do have a question, you're welcome to come off mute or put that in the chat. If you want to come off video so we can see your face, you can wave at us. That's great too. It's great to see who's on the other end of these calls and build that interaction there. And the recording will be emailed out after and put up on our Energy District YouTube channel. So you can feel free to revisit this resource later on or share with others in your network. So our guest today is Mike Ludeking of greenpenny Bank. Welcome, Mike. And Mike is a commercial lender. Oh, great to have you. So great. And Mike's a commercial lender and vice president at greenpenny, which is a division of Decorah Bank and Trust. He was an ag and commercial lender for 10 years before transitioning to greenpenny full-time in 2021 and has been financing solar and renewable energy projects for 8 years, most recently financing commercial and industrial PPA and community solar garden projects. Mike lives in Decorah with his wife, Carol, and children, Nora, Emily, and Sam. And in addition, I will add that Mike also serves as a board member of the Winneshiek Energy District. So Mike, thank you for sharing your time with us and your expertise today. And I will let you take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Kristen. As Kristen said, I'm Mike Ludeking. I work with greenpenny Bank here in Decorah. Decorah is powered by Decorah Bank and Trust. I'm sitting in the Decorah branch building right now in downtown Decorah. I'll move on here. A little about me, she did mention, but let's see if I can get this to work. There we go. So a little bit about me. I have been a commercial lender now for just over 12 years. I have financed around $80 million of renewable energy projects since 2020. 40 plus of those have been nonprofit projects financed in Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota. And I also did install solar in my home in 2019. So if you have any questions about how, from a personal perspective and how solar has worked for me on a smaller scale, I'd be happy to share any of that. As you can see there on the map on your screen, those little green dots or homes or whatever those are there, they're scattered throughout the Midwest, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois. Those are all the locations of the nonprofit projects that we have financed over the last several years. You'll notice there that we do finance in Wisconsin and Missouri, but there has not been many nonprofit projects that have popped up in those states as power purchase agreements are not allowed. So we mainly focus on Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois. A little bit about greenpenny. So as I mentioned, we are located here in beautiful Decorah. We're a virtual and carbon neutral bank headquartered here. As I said, I'm in the Decorah Bank branch right now. And we're powered by Decorah Bank, which just means that we're a branch of Decorah Bank and Trust, which is family and employee owned and has been in the community since 1960. We do focus on, greenpenny focuses on renewable energy lending in the 5 states that you see there: Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Missouri. And as far as nonprofit work goes, like I mentioned, it's mainly Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois. But then we're also a full service bank. So we do take in deposits, and we pledge that those deposits will only fund clean energy and carbon reducing projects. So to get into a little bit of the meat and potatoes about what we want to talk about here today, we want to talk about the different nonprofit solar options. So when you're looking at going solar, what options do you have as a nonprofit? And this has changed recently. So this is really good timing by the Winneshiek Energy District and the Allamakee Energy District to put this on, because just in the last couple of years, there's been another option here that's been added for you. So the one that you've probably heard of is a power purchase agreement. So this is a third party which owns the project. The nonprofit purchases the solar array's electric output for a predetermined period, typically 15 to 25 years. It can go up to 30 years typically. Then you just, as the nonprofit, you lease or rent that electricity or buy that electricity from the owner of the system, typically an investor of some sort. And like I said, it's a predetermined period, it's a predetermined rate, which is signed in the contract, and you don't have to worry about any ownership. This has been around for years, 10, 15 years, I think this has been around. There are a lot of nonprofit projects in the Decorah community in Northeast Iowa, as well as Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, that have gone up using this method over the last, like I said, 10 to 15 years. It's what I call the tried and true method. If you've looked into going solar in the last, several years, this is probably what you've researched or what you've heard of. Until 2022, this was really the only economically feasible way for a nonprofit to go solar. Because as you may know, as a non-taxed entity, you couldn't take advantage of the 30% tax credit. So you could certainly put solar on your roof or on your site, but you couldn't take advantage of that 30% tax credit. So the economics of it typically didn't really work. If it wasn't necessarily a large issue for you with the economics, but you just wanted to meet some of your sustainability goals, there definitely were some nonprofits that did install solar that way. But like I said, it's not as economically feasible as some of the options that we have out there today. The second method here that's used is what is called elective pay. So this is, or you may have heard it called direct pay. So this was just introduced in the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. This is where a nonprofit actually owns and maintains the system. So there's no third-party owner, there's no investor. You don't have to worry about that, finding an investor. You own the system, you maintain the system. But this elective pay legislation enabled tax-exempt and governmental entities to benefit from the clean energy tax credit. And you really benefit from that in the form of a rebate check for the most part. So I don't like to use the word rebate, but in this instance with nonprofits, it truly is really just a check that the IRS is going to send your organization. So digging in deeper on the power purchase agreement option. So as I mentioned, a solar PPA is really just a financial agreement where a developer or installer arranges for the design, permitting, and financing of a solar array at little to no cost for the nonprofit. You don't have to worry about any of those costs. There's no upfront costs to you. The third-party owner of the system sells the power generated to the host customer or the nonprofit at a predetermined rate that's typically lower than what your utility rate is. So that's all determined on the front end in the contract. And so when you sign that contract, if I'm paying, let's say 10 cents a kilowatt hour, I am now going to be buying electricity for, say, 8 cents a kilowatt hour through this PPA agreement. So you know what your savings are going to be from day one, essentially, as long as the system generates power and the sun shines, you're going to save money. So the nice thing there is like I said, there's no cash outlay. You don't have to worry about that. You just sign and enjoy the savings per se. Typically there is, like I said, guaranteed savings from the utility rates. It's not always the case, but it is typically baked in. It gives you financial incentives to sign the contract. And then obviously the third-party investor has a return on investment as well that they need to make. And so they've already figured that out typically on their end of what their rates need to be to make their, return on investment goals. Typically, in a power purchase agreement, there's also a buyout provision. So I have seen this in a lot of PPAs that I've read through, that there's this buyout provision that exists where the nonprofit has the option to purchase the system after the tax incentives are realized by the third-party investor. This is typically after 7, 10, or 15 years. You don't necessarily know what the price of the system will be at that milestone, but it's typically a market rate. There may be some sort of an appraisal that's made at that time, and then you have the option to buy out that system, and then you would own and maintain the system as the nonprofit. I will make note that this is not an option in Wisconsin or Missouri, so I don't know that if we have any folks joining from those states today, but it is not an option in Wisconsin or Missouri. But if you're in Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, and there are plenty of other states around the country where you're in luck if you're from any other states. But those two, the PPA option is not an option for you. Talking a little bit about the pros or the benefits of a PPA. So just stress some of the things I've already said here. There are no upfront costs of the investment. You have a predictable cost of electricity, typically for 20 to 25 years. This hedges against a rise in electricity rates. We all know what rates have done in our area over the last several years, and we know that there's more on the doorstep here for us. And so what this really does is it allows you to lock in your electricity rates and your electricity costs over that period, whatever period of time it is you're signing that PPA. And you have a very predictable cost of electricity over that time, as opposed to just being subject to whatever the rate increases of the utility will be. Another pro here would be just that there's really limited risk, as you're not the owner of the system. There's limited downside risk with the installer or with the finances of the project. That really falls on the shoulders of whoever the investor will be in this project. And then it's clean energy at guaranteed savings. So if you're looking at sustainability goals, if you're looking to just be a part of the clean energy revolution, it's a great way to join into that without having to put a lot of money into the project, having to get your board of directors or your congregation or whoever it is to approve a large cash outlay or a large debt instrument that you guys may have to pay back for 20 or 25 years. You don't have to worry about that, and you can enjoy the clean energy at really no upfront cost to you. With the benefits of anything, there are going to be some downside to that, some downsides to that as well. So the PPA cons, there's a long-term contract, and so these are complex legal documents that really hold these deals together. So you really want to make sure that you have an attorney that represents your organization that's familiar with these and with the structure, and can review all of these transaction documents. I have seen PPAs as long as 30 to 40 pages, and it's going to be something of a foreign concept to most folks. And so you really want to make sure that you have somebody that's experienced in looking at these, because when you're going to sign any contract for 20 or 30 years, you really want to make sure you know what you're getting into. And so, if you take this offline and anybody is interested in a PPA, I definitely have some attorneys that I can recommend that I know are pretty involved in this space that would be good for you to look at. There is third-party risk, and so I can't really stress this enough that I've been in this space and financing solar for quite a few years now, and I'll just say all contractors are not created equal. As a bank, that's our largest risk, is third-party risk. We know that as long as the solar is installed and it's installed correctly, we know that the sun is going to shine a certain number of days every year, and we can get our production estimates on the solar production pretty darn close. But if the solar installer doesn't install it correctly, or they're not using top tier equipment or whatever it might be, there is some risk there that you're not going to get the production that you wanted. And so there definitely is a third party risk there, and that's true for whether you go with a PPA or elective pay. It's just a risk of having solar installed on your property. The other thing I'll mention, a couple things here, is that the rooftop or the land harboring the array is going to have an easement or a lease, and so the installer is going to need an easement or a lease involved to install the solar, to maintain, and the investor is going to need that to maintain the solar. And so that might be a very limited piece of property that they can actually walk in or drive on to get to the system, but it's going to exist nonetheless. And it's probably not a big issue, but I just want to make you aware that it is there. One extra hurdle that's needed in a PPA is that an investor is needed. So if the developer, the installer, doesn't have somebody lined up or in their back pocket to invest in the project, it may fall on your shoulders to try to find somebody. If you're a church, it may be somebody in your congregation, it may be somebody from your community, a school district, it could be the same thing. It could be somebody that's involved with the school, somebody from your community that wants to, invest in the project. But it is another hurdle that needs to be checked off the list if you are going to go with a PPA structure. And the other thing I'll mention here, this is probably the least, the smallest issue on this list, but you may have a limited control of design or materials of the system. Remember, you're not as the nonprofit, you're not owning the system. And so there are different designs and there are different panels and things like that are out there. And so you may not be in control of that design, especially if you're looking at a buyout provision in, say, 7 or 10 years. If that's something that really interests you, you may want to be more involved with the design of the project, whether it's just aesthetics or whether you're getting more into what type of panels and what type of inverters and that sort of thing. You may just want to be more involved with the developer on what those materials are going to be. We'll get into elective pay. So elective pay, this was, as I said here, created by the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. The nonprofit owns the project. You don't have to worry about an investor. You're in charge of it. You own it, which means you own the maintenance as well. But this is a new option here that was just created in the last couple of years. This really allows for the tax exempt entities to benefit from the tax credit in the form of a direct payment, and which is really just thought of, I think of it as a rebate check. And so you install the solar, and then once you file your tax returns, you will get that rebate check back in the form of a check sent to your organization from the IRS. What are the pros of elective pay? So you're eligible for the 30% rebate check. And I will mention here that in some communities, this is more than 30%. 30% is really just the standard. And if you're in different communities, which would be like I think it's an energy adder community, which is most of Allamakee County. If there's anybody from Allamakee, I'm sure there is on this call. Most of Allamakee counts as an extra 10%, qualifies as an extra 10%. So instead of it being 30%, you would be looking at 40%. I don't think that qualifies for Waukon proper in the city limits, but and anybody here that understands that better than me, feel free to pipe in and correct me. But the rest of Allamakee, I do believe qualifies for a 40% adder or 40% rebate check. The other thing here would be that there's fixed predictable cost of electricity. Just like on the PPA, this is very similar to the PPA in that you are locking in that cost of electricity over the next 20 or 30 years. Really, as long as your panels are going to last. I've heard some panels right now are rated as long as 35 or 40 years. So you're going to have that production for a long, long time. And then the nonprofit's really able to maximize all of the incentives here, as opposed to worrying about having a third-party investor and their ROI or their return on investment goals and objectives. The nonprofit's really in charge of maximizing all those incentives for themselves. So the cons here of an elective pay, that as I see it, this is a new program that just came out in 2022. With that being said, it's been out for almost 2 years. There have really not been a lot of organizations who have utilized this option. They just came out with the final ruling and some of the guidance on this system or on this program in March of this year. So it took them almost 18 months to come up with the final rule and some of the guidance. And I just expect there to be some growing pains with the program. I don't know that that's to be true, but at all the government programs that I've seen, there usually are some things that they just don't think about. It's a great option. It's a great second option for a lot of places. But I just feel like there haven't been that many organizations who have used this. I haven't financed any. And so I think there'll be some, bumps in the road going down here. So that's one thing that I see. The other thing that I see here that a lot of people may or may not think about is that the IRS payment's delayed. So if you're looking at installing the system today and the contractor is going to need to be paid 100% of this project, but you're not receiving your 30% elective pay until next, call it April or May, when you get your tax returns filed, there's a fairly sizable gap there where you're going to get that 30% back or 40% in Allamakee, some of Allamakee County, and you're going to have to come up with that money. So are you going to finance it? How are you going to come up with that 30%? And then talking about financing, most banks are going to require cash down payment. So as I said, there's no investor to worry about, but now you're the borrower. So if you're going to finance the project, your nonprofit is going to have to go to the bank, get a loan, and likely is going to have to come up with cash down of 10 to 30% to qualify at the bank. And so that's definitely a con as I see it, because of all the nonprofits that I know, everyone has a great mission, but they don't have a lot of cash just stuck away for a rainy day for putting solar on their roof or on their property. So, and some of these systems could be quite large. So to have, $50,000 or $25,000 just sitting around earmarked for a solar installation, personally, I don't see that from a lot of nonprofits. So that's definitely a hurdle that would need to be cleared to get this done. And the other thing is the economics are really driven by interest rates. So you'll see here, I'm going to go through the cash flows of both a PPA and a direct pay real quickly. And you'll see that the economics of the direct pay are really driven by interest rates. So here is the first cash flow, I'll call it, for a power purchase agreement. So this is a system that's really hypothetical. I did take some numbers from a system that I financed several years ago, but changed up some others. So it's really a hypothetical project, but I think it's a pretty good representation of what you would see out in the marketplace today. This is for a meter that uses about 211,000 kilowatt hours per year on average. So maybe about 18 to 20 times what a typical home would consume in a typical year. So I want to draw your attention to the fourth column from the left and really look at the total energy charge. So you can see that in 2024 here, it starts at about 25,392, and then it increases all the way down to over $51,000 in 25 years from today. So you can see there the 25-year cost of energy estimated at over $925,000. over the next 25 years. So usually when I'm going through cash flows with customers and I point out this number, I usually kind of sit and just wait, because there's usually an audible gasp from the customer when they think of how much money they're going to be putting out for just the cost of energy over those years. And it also gives you a perspective of the potential of what, I shouldn't even say potential, more likelihood of what energy is going to cost you 10, 20, 30 years from now. So you can see here what I have here as an escalator is a 3% year-over-year increase. So obviously this is not exactly how a utility would increase rates, but over the course of, and I can't remember the exact number, but one developer told me, and Kristen and you guys probably know what this number is, but one developer told me that the average utility rate increase in Alliant Energy territory, which we're in here, is 3.8% per year. And so this is a little bit less than that, actually. And obviously that's not exactly how they work, but they don't increase rates every single year. But now, every, I don't know when the rate cases come out, but we're looking at a pretty large increase coming in the next couple of years here. I think that's going to be implemented in October. So we're looking at a 20% increase right now. So you can see how those small incremental changes would increase your energy charge, as well as if you're looking at a 20% increase, you're looking at going from $25,000 really to $30,000 in the course of 1 year. So those numbers can make a big difference for your nonprofit. The other thing is I want you to look at here is on the right side, on the third column from the right, is your PPA energy cost. So you can see here that really what I've modeled is a 20% savings year over year. My PPA rate escalates at 3% to basically mirror what the utility is increasing. And you can see that my starting rate with the PPA is 9.6 cents per kilowatt hour versus 12 cents at the utility. This isn't exact, it's not an exact science, but this would be how your typical PPA would read. And you can see what your savings are from day one. So you can see that it increases as you go down the column here from just over 20,000 per year to just over 36,000 in year 2048. So you can see that it increases similar to what the utility is going to increase, but you're saving over the 25-year total savings. It's over $233,000. Obviously, this is hypothetical, but this is what you would see in a typical PPA. And I just covered 4 or 5 of these projects this morning for the rest of the bank in a presentation. And this is a very typical number that you'll see. Actually, one number from a project in Illinois was over $640,000 on a 25-year PPA. So it really depends on the situation, but usually the cost savings are baked in, and roughly what your savings are going to be.
Mike, we do have a comment in the chat. Amy says, I see that you have $0 annual O&M. Is it realistic to assume no inverter replacements over that many years? And also, for a system this size, insurance would be a noticeable cost.
That's good. Great question. So in this situation, since it's a PPA, you're not in ownership of the system. So you wouldn't be required to replace those inverters unless that's set out in the agreement on the PPA. I personally haven't seen a PPA where it requires the host to change out the inverters, but it is probably possible in a negotiation, as well as insurance. So you would have to talk to your insurance agent, and if the system is going on your on your roof, there could be an increase, I guess, but you're not in ownership of that system. And so the PPAs that I've seen, it's typical of straight line 0 for all of those operating maintenance insurance fields.
Thank you.
Now we'll get to elective pay. So this is the elective pay pro forma, and I'll just point out right away, the first thing you see there is the O&M and the insurance, and you do have a number filled in there. I will point out that I didn't take into account inverter replacement, which would typically come somewhere between years 10 and 15. But So you could just add in a little bit extra cost there in those years. But you can see that you are in charge of the operating, maintenance, and insurance for those years. So again, we'll go to the same columns. We'll go from the left side column there, the lighter gray, I'll call it, is exactly the same as the one I just showed you. All of those numbers are exactly the same. 25-year cost of energy, $925,000 cost over the 25 years estimated. And then if you look at the third column from the right on the right side there, it turns into a loan payment. So I am estimating that in year one, your loan is going to be, you're going to get 100% finance at the bank, which may or may not happen. But that's a 100% finance loan payment. And then after that 30% rebate comes in after year one, you would apply that 30% to the loan, and then we'd be refinanced, and you can see your loan payment goes down, and it is levelized for 24 years. There are some things there that may or not be accurate, just because you're probably not going to get a 24-year locked rate at the bank, but we don't really know whether rates are going to go up or down. So I just use the levelized number there for the time being. But you can see that it starts out a little higher than what our PPA was. So you're paying almost $40,000 the first year in a loan payment, and then it drops down to $27,000. That's still higher than what your total energy charge would have been by just buying from the utility. So you can see there in years 1 through 5, really, you're not really saving any money. You're actually probably in the hole by going to the elective pay. It's really in the later years that you start to see the good savings from an elective pay, when your utility starts to increase their prices fairly substantially. So you can see there in the later years, you're saving between $10,000 and $20,000 a year. But up until that point, it's not a huge savings for you. So it just takes a little longer to get this going. I will point out that this was an 8.5% loan rate. I did take that into account. That's what the prime rate is right now. That's what loan rates typically are through greenpenny. That's what we look at, and it's a 25-year term. I do want to stress that if I ran these numbers beforehand. If you can get rates to around 7.75% over 25 years, it really gives the elective pay and the PPA the same total savings over 25 years, roughly. Again, as I mentioned, that's not taking into account those inverter replacements. So you got to keep in mind that that's probably going to happen somewhere in 10 or 15 years. But you can see, and I really want to point out that the interest rate really drives these savings. And so if you could get an interest rate at 5 or 6% with the bank, if rates start to come down here, this elective pay option really looks a lot better and a lot more attractive as opposed to what it does today. Now, I'll say that today, I think it's still a decent option. I think it gives you an option at ownership, but I don't think the way that it sits today that it's as economically advantageous as the PPA is. And that's my opinion, of course, and you can run a lot of different scenarios. But when I've run and crunched numbers here in the last 6 months or so, this is kind of what I find, is that if you're looking at economics only, PPA is probably a better option right now than the elective pay. But as we talked earlier, there's some drawbacks to that as well. So see, I'm kind of running over time here, Kristen. I'll try to talk fast here. But there are some obstacles to going solar. So the one thing is demand charges. Demand charge is billed based on the maximum amount of power consumed during any 15-minute period in a given month. I'm not sure if that's always a 15-minute period, or different utilities use different methods there. But that's the basics of a demand charge. And think of a school who uses air conditioning, and likely all of the units turn on at the same time of the day, every single day. The school is going to get billed according to this 15-minute high usage mark, or high water mark for the month. And there's no way to get around that charge, because essentially you're not going to be able to have enough solar production to be able to offset that at that time, that specific time of the day. So the utility is going to bill you for that usage. And many times this can equal 40%, 40 to 50% of your total monthly bill. So I see this a lot on like water treatment facilities, schools. It can be a pretty big obstacle to getting solar to really work for you. But that's something that we can talk a little bit more offline. There are some strategies to try to mitigate those demand charges. Of course, they cost a little bit of money, but we're seeing more and more opportunity to offset those demand charges. One thing that people do talk to me a lot about is uncertainty in legislation. So, we're looking at an election year this year. Will the government change regulation or incentives? I'm not an expert, but I don't think so. There could be small changes that are made, but I also think that the solar industry is mature enough right now where I think that it would be a huge mistake for any candidate or any any body to overturn what they've done in the last couple of years here. I'm not saying it would be off the table, but I think that it's unlikely. I also think that, and I don't want to get political by any means, but if you're looking at overturning some of the things that the Democrats have done in office, there are many, many Republicans who are benefiting from solar. And so I don't think no matter what a candidate is what platform they're going to be on or what they're going to say, I don't think that when it comes down to it, I don't think they're going to make large changes here. I think that that what we see is what we're going to, have in place for the next foreseeable future. The other obstacle here is roof space or green space. Do you want to tie up your roof or green space with solar panels? So if you have a nonprofit organization, you may not have any green space for it. You may not want to put it on your roof. I totally understand that. There could be extra costs along with putting it on your roof. You may have to re-roof your roof, whatever that might be, or you just don't want to use up your green space. Maybe you've got a beautiful green space and you just don't want to put solar there. I totally get it. That can be definitely an obstacle. I've definitely heard plenty of organizations that this has really been a sticking point for them. Why is now a great time? Like I said earlier, utility rates are on the rise. Alliant is raising rates up to 20% for commercial, industrial, and municipal, phased in over 2 years, starting here this fall. Residential, they're, I think, raising it 13%. We know rates are going to continue to go up. It's just the way of the world. Your bread, milk, and groceries at the grocery store, they don't decrease in cost. Neither is your utility rates. They're going to continue to go up. So this is an opportunity. Solar is an opportunity for you to take control of your electricity costs. It's one of the only real ways you can do it, unless you cut your electricity usage, which Paul and Kristen at the Energy District are great at working with you on as well. But this is a way for you to take control of your electricity costs, achieve your sustainability goals within your organization, as I mentioned, while being part of the clean energy revolution. And elective pay is really a new option. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think the economics are as good right now as with the power purchase agreement, but it gives you another option for ownership. If you really want to own your own system and you don't want to deal with a third-party investor, the elective pay is a good option for you and your organization. It gives you that extra option that wasn't there a couple of years ago. See some chat starting to come in. I don't know if we're just going to wait here. So how do you get started? So the first thing is to call a local solar contractor to do an analysis of your property. Ask them about a PPA option. Call your local lender at greenpenny to discuss options and run cash flows. We can get you up-to-date cash flows. We can look at the economics of your specific project. One thing I've learned in solar is there are no two projects that are the same. Everything is different depending on your area, your utility, and your contractor. And so we will look at all of those and put them all together and get you some good concrete numbers. Always get multiple quotes. As I said, no two contractors are the same. I think we're really, really lucky here in the Decorah and Waukon areas that we have some really trusted and good local contractors. But that's not the case everywhere. Like I said, we work in 5 states. I see a lot of contractors that are in business today and out of business the next. You just really want to make sure that you get multiple quotes, because not only can the pricing be different, but the time it takes to get the project done and complete can be different as well. And it's no fault of the contractor, but they just may be so busy that they can't actually get out and install the system for you for 6 or 8 months, where the next guy might have a break in his schedule and he can get out there within the next 30 days to get it done for you. And then just use your resources. So we've got great resources here in Winneshiek Energy District, Allamakee Energy District, your state solar trade associations, so ISETA, MNCEA, Renew Wisconsin, if you're from Wisconsin, and the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. So there's some really great resources if you don't know where to turn or you have some questions. And we've come to the end. I ran about 10 minutes longer than I thought. So my apologies there, but we'll take questions now if you guys have any comments or questions.
Mike, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. I hope everyone on the call did too. We will take questions now if you would like to come off mute and ask your question, or put it in the chat and I'll be happy to ask it as well. While you're thinking, I will just mention that we love to encourage people to reduce before you produce if you're thinking solar. Otherwise, you'll end up spending a lot more on your energy production than you need to. And if you would like ways to get started with that, you just give us a call and we can help you evaluate what opportunities you might have for energy efficiency at your home, nonprofit, church, whatever organization you're calling in with today. So now welcoming questions, and I will stop talking. Or maybe we've already answered all of them. Good job, Mike.
Could you talk a little bit about more about demand charges and how to get around them?
Yeah, so there are a couple options, and I am not an expert whatsoever on this. Paul may be better suited to answer these questions. But the one that I've heard of the most is called peak shaving, and peak shaving really involves battery systems. And so you would have battery systems in place, and that would harness your solar generation and then release it at those peak energy times. And so essentially what it does is it shaves off the peak of that product, or that consumed energy. And so you don't have to pay as much of a demand charge. And I'm trying to think of the other one, Kristen or Paul or anybody else that's on. There is one other option. I can't think of it off the top of my head, to be honest with you.
Yeah, general efficiency improvement, staggering the start times of equipment. That becomes especially acute if, for example, you're using electricity for space heating in the dead of winter. Can you stagger the start time of different equipments for different uses where your load profile tends to be relatively constant? Battery storage as a peak shaving technique becomes quite difficult. So for a wastewater treatment plant, for example, that's often a challenge because your electric usage is kind of stable, regardless of what time of day it is. And then one other point that I see Kevin Mullins made that I think is something to point out. He says solar alone can't offset demand charges. That's a really important point. I've looked at a lot of large utility users. So for example, schools, hospitals, that type of thing, depending on who your utility provider is and how efficiently you're using electricity, the demand charges can make up a huge portion of your bill. So inefficient users, sometimes I've seen demand charges that are in excess of 70%. So that means that solar can't be used to offset those demand charges. And if you don't have a good strategy to reduce those demand charges, solar becomes exponentially more difficult to work.
Just to clarify, this is Amy Buska. Right now, you're probably paying in a rate class that uses demand charges, you're probably paying on average over the year less than about 8 cents per kilowatt hour, sometimes much less, like 3 cents in the winter. So, you know, there's no PPA that's offering you a rate of 3 cents. So that's what's not working. If a line gets their whole rate change that they're asking for, I still don't think it's going to be okay, but it would be worth looking at again.
And one additional comment, Amy. So most customers are not demand charge customers. You have to have a really high threshold of electricity use. So in looking at like smaller schools, churches, you know, museums, whatever it is, most organizations don't cross that threshold. It's depending on your utility, but for Alliant customers, it's 20,000 kilowatt hours a month. That's a lot of electricity. So the whole demand charge conversation doesn't even come into play if you sit below that threshold.
Thank you, Paul. All right, well, let's thank Mike. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. And with that, we conclude our energy lunch. We do have another energy lunch coming up in July about energy efficient cooling. So if you have an old air conditioning unit you've been wanting to replace, or if you have been wanting in this 90-degree weather to start including cooling into your home system, you could tune into that one. Again, thank you, Mike. Great to have you. And everyone feel free to hop off if you want to linger on the call.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
You.